Take two, my friend. Chris, welcome
Hey,
back.
I'm back.
I'm
Woohoo.
back. How you
Uh,
feeling?
95%, It's one of those things where you like I was sick for a good 4 days or something, just sleeping all day. And then um it got better, but I still feel like sluggish or tired a little bit. So it's been hard to I tried to record yesterday. I tried to just do some regular coding this past week. It just didn't really, I couldn't do a whole lot. So I was just doing lots of support and catching up on things and not really able to get into any deep work, which is frustrating. That's what I want to do the most, but just couldn't get in the zone. So how you been?
I'm good, man. Um, Extremely personal note. I stopped taking this medicine I've been taking for 6 years called Lexapro because I have crippling anxiety and depression, OCD, and all the fun things.
Man,
Uh,
how's it going?
it's been hell. I wanted to come off the medicine because there's a couple of side effects that just make my life, like my quality of life, like bleh. Like
Mm-hmm.
one of them is actually like, I'm not an expert in any of this, but like one of the known side effects is like weight gain. Um, and like I finally did some math. Like I was like 220 when I got married. That was 2012. Um, and then I started taking Lexapro shortly after that, and like slowly, like just found I couldn't stop eating. And
Mm,
from what I've learned, like one of the side effects that can happen is like your something how it works in the brain like tells you you're actually not full yet.
right. And
Uh
this messes with that.
yeah, and I was like, that makes sense because I eat like embarrassing amounts of food. Like we could order like a large pizza and I'm like, all right, still hungry. And like
I mean, in college I could do that, but not anymore.
sure, like but there's also a
Yeah,
point where like, you
yeah.
know,
It's not your natural state.
yeah, and like there's a lot of things to play. Like I eat my emotions,
Ooh,
and I have
I,
lots of
I do
emotions.
too. I've also got a bad sweet tooth.
Yeah, so like I'm not saying like it's just the medicine's the reason I gained weight, but like it kind of makes sense.
No,
Like
definitely. I think it's a subtle thing too, you're like when you when they tell you that, you're like, I'll probably be able to deal with that. And then it's slow and that's what gets you because you don't realize it until you're well past where you should be and you're like, oh crap, you know?
yeah, like 130 pounds later, I'm like, man, my quality of life's not so awesome. Like I want to play with my kids, but I get out of breath. So I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
I don't know. So I was like, hey doc, let's work on that. And he's like, sure. And worked on like a tapering off plan. It's like I've tapered off and like it's been awful. Like
Mm.
I'm happy to be off the medicine. Like I get full eating like normal amounts of food, which is great. But I've been getting these like brain zaps, which is apparently a common thing where like uh feels like little like electric pulses to my head. And like every day around 2 o'clock, I like feel lightheaded, like almost like I'm getting achy, like I'm getting the flu.
Huh.
And then I've been just irritable. Like I try to like be kind of like an upbeat, like I don't know. I try not to be
Yeah.
fake, but like I try to like just be really positive and fun. And like these last 2 weeks, like the smallest things irritate me. Like somebody told me the wrong rule playing a card game the other night, and I like wanted to flip the table. So like,
Yeah.
uh, I like it's like my best friend in the world. I look in the eyes like I am not mad at you. I am just mad at this situation for no good reason. So I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's one of those things that we have all these medicines and things and it's like, well, there's it solves something, but it introduces other problems. So it's not like all of these are great. They're not we still have so much left to figure out and understand on all that it's just frustrating because you can address one problem but introduce two more or whatever with side effects and That sucks.
Totally. Yeah, and I'm totally not like anti like mental health, like brain medications. Like I take another one, um which I'm not I'm not sure that I wasn't just prescribed like speed because it like it gives me so much
You have
energy and
to do you have to snort the medicine
like
or heat it up in a spoon and inject it?
no, I get it I get it from Walgreens from my pharmacist, but
Uh,
anyway,
in the back room. You have to get it out by the dumpster.
sir, you're gonna have to actually come inside the store. You can't be in the drive-through for this. But yeah, no, it's been a wild ride. I also like I tweeted about it yesterday because it's kind of like a pretty crummy part of my life, and like I don't really want to talk about it like so like people like feel sorry for me because like I don't even really feel sorry for myself. Like it's just part of it, but like I also
It's a
I get
good
really
thing. Like
frustrated.
people, I think people, if you don't have to deal with it, don't even think about it. So it's a good thing for you to talk about, just so people know what's going on with other people. You know, like
Yeah,
it's a good thing to understand. This is a lot of people are lucky and don't have to deal with that, but they don't even understand the things that you might be going through or whatever. And if they did know, they could, be more, like if you if you are irritable, instead of them being like, God, I hate Jason, you be like, okay, it's not his fault that he's feeling irritable. It's just like, a side effect of this drug or whatever, getting off of it and all of that. So it's I think you can just understand better when people talk about those things. I think it's good.
yeah, that's a big driving factor is because like my friend the other night was like, "You're being really cheeky," and I love it, but like, uh, because it like I don't know, I'm very passive aggressive when I'm irritable, and I guess like he finds it amusing. Um, and so like, but at the same time, like I want people to know that. So like you said, like I don't want people to be like, "Oh, this dude's just a jerk." Like, I mean,
Right,
yes, I am.
people may not find it funny, and
Right, like I am being a jerk, and I might be short, and like
yeah, and
there's not an excuse for it, but like I do want people to be aware, like, hey, this isn't like who I am. Like,
yeah,
and the other thing too is, I guess I wish more people talked about it because, like, when I try and find information about like coming off this medicine, like people list the side effects, like they're like, yeah, I felt this or I felt this, but I don't know. I guess I just if other people do this, I want them to know, like, you're not crazy. Like
hmm
this is a wild ride. Like, uh, I've never had to like come off any type of like substance addiction or anything like that. Um, I've never thought it's easy like for people to do that, but I am even more empathetic to like that type of journey now. So
yeah, totally.
anyway, so that's casual, lighthearted news that's been going on. Uh, that and I got hacked, which is
Mm.
cool.
Do you set your password to password?
I set it to I love Chris Oliver 619, and no, I
Now everybody's gonna know that. You better change it.
crap. No, I am a password repeater. The I got one password years ago, and I use it religiously, minus the part where it's like you should have a different password, and we'll like even generate it for you. I'm like, no, I don't need that. Um, and then
That's hilarious.
I got listed on the pwned, like have I been pwned, whatever.
Hmm
And but it was one of my old email addresses. And I was like, no, that'd be all right. I don't use that email address with that password anymore, which was just I was lazy. And so I was talking to Shannon Wednesday, and I was like, "Oh, did you just log into Netflix?" I just got an email because she was at her mom's house. So she was like, "No," and I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess that makes sense because it said this person logged in Colombia." I was like, "All right, like I'll just log in real quick and change the password." And literally before I could even finish that thought, I got an email that said, "Your email address has been changed." And I was like, "Well, that's going to be a problem." And then not 10 seconds later, your password has been changed. I was like, well, Shayna, I need to let you go. Not that Netflix is this like revealing thing about me. Like I'm pretty open about like what I watch and stuff even. But I just anytime like somebody hacks my account, I just feel violated.
Of course.
And so I was like, I called Netflix and they're like, hey, can you log in and give us the PIN number? And I was like, I wish, like, otherwise I wouldn't be calling you. But they were like, yeah, we see that. They changed the email, the password, but luckily they haven't watched anything. And in my head, I was like, what does that matter? Like,
That's like,
great.
oh, you just reminded me one time at one of my old jobs, we had this shared iMac that was in the office, and we'd play music on for the office on Spotify on there. And one night we were having a meetup, and I remember going to that and then turning on SSH, and I went back to my laptop, and I just remotely would log in and then change and just repeatedly, continuously, just like every time I would go change it to Justin Bieber or something, my boss would go over there and be like, "What is going on?" And change it to whatever he wanted to listen to, and I'd go and change it back. It took him a long time to figure out it was me. And I had like a wireless mouse that I connected to it from across the room as well. And I just jiggle it whenever he was over there. And he was like
Oh,
freaking out.
dude, those are the best stories. I have a similar story I want to share. Uh, I'm always weird about following up a story with a story because I'm not trying to like one up you. I have a similar story where like I did the same thing. I had a Mac at work and like this was when I worked at the music store and our location used to be a car dealership, a smaller car dealership. So like one side was like the showroom and the other side was like where the mechanics worked.
Hmm.
And so the way we had divided up was like the showroom was like where we sold pianos and like, you know, the nicer air quotes things. And then like the other was called like the garage band, which was like kind of a cool name.
Nice. I like
Uh,
that.
so they're like two separate buildings. And I worked on the piano side. And so like I would, I had this coworker who's like one of my friends. He's probably in his like late 70s, early 80s, and self proclaimed like doesn't know much about technology. So I would always go over to the other side and just blast Miley Cyrus Party in the USA and like walk over there and he's like, your computer's been hacked and like screaming at me, like banging on the keyboard.
That's
Uh,
hilarious.
and then also one time we got an open sign that had a like a remote to it. And so me and my friend Matt, we convinced him that the on sign was like a clap on, clap off kind of thing. So like Matt kept the remote in his pocket and I clapped and it would turn on. And then like I clapped and he would turn it off. And we were like, oh, har har, like that's a funny joke. Until the next morning we came in and one of our coworkers said, we came in here at closing time and Ron was standing on a ladder clapping at the open sign because it wouldn't turn on and off.
That's amazing.
And I was like, oh no, now I feel bad. And then he put on Facebook, he's like, I've been had by the clap. And I was like, Ron, I don't know if that was the best choice of terms.
Oh my God, that's great.
Oh my gosh, sorry. This is the digress episode. But anyway, so I listened to one password and I reset all 100 of my passwords that were considered vulnerable because they were the same.
Yeah, that's the trap of I always like hand wrote a password. Like I'm really good about doing passwords that are just generated by LastPass. Except for when it's like, an app on your TV or on your printer connecting to the Wi-Fi network or something like that where you have a really crappy interface for typing. The last thing I want to do is use a 36 character password with special characters and all this crap because it
Yep.
takes like 20 minutes to type in because you miss one thing and then it takes you another 5 minutes to go and redo it and then oh yeah missed something else and it's just like a nightmare. So then Yeah, I do have several of those where I'm like, I have very trivial passwords on purpose for a few things, and I'm like, I should go fix those. It's annoying. I think LastPass always is good about like they analyze your account, so whenever you log in or whatever, it's like, hey, just a reminder, like you have this many accounts with the same password. You should go
Yeah.
update those, which
One
is
password
really
does that
nice.
too. They call it Watchtower, and I just always ignore it because I'm an idiot.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you're like, this is just annoying stuff to deal with, so you can really easily be like, I'll deal with it later.
It's kind of like when you have a really bad production problem. You like don't worry about it until it affects you, and then it's too
Hmm.
late. Like
Yeah.
having backups in place.
And I was going to say, for anyone listening that is, implementing Devise or something, make sure that you enable the feature that when someone changes their email, they have to confirm it with a link in the email. Because if you don't do that, then I can break into your account, change your email, and you can never recover your account ever again. And we can't look it up either because the old email was not in the database anymore. So, that
Yes,
kind of stuff is very, very scary.
I'm
So
really
make sure you have that.
I'm really lucky that Netflix like knew my old password, or excuse me, not my old email, because they're like, yeah, we see this change,
Yeah, yeah,
and then they made me confirm with like the last 8 of my credit card. And I was like, cool, like this works.
yeah.
Um,
And hopefully that wasn't a scam the scammer that you called that was like, what is your full credit card number? And you're like, oh sure, absolutely. They're like, dang
no,
it.
uh, the one thing nice about having like an Apple TV and an iPhone is that I got logged out, so I had to re-log in, and I had this like absurd password. But Apple was like, "Oh, we know this is Netflix, and we have this stored in your iCloud password keychain.
Mm,
We can just
mm-hmm.
autofill this for you." And I was like, "I want to fly out to Cupertino and hug everyone right now."
Dude, my favorite is when you go to like your friend's house and you pull up your iPhone and you're like, "Hey, what's your Wi-Fi password?" And then they open their phone and like tap a button to share the password and
It's
that's it.
so
And you're
good.
like "Holy crap, this is sweet." You're like, it's such a good idea.
This
I
is the future.
I love that stuff. Like those are the small details that make such a good experience, but most things are super clunky because they don't implement little details like that. But they're
Mhm.
hugely valuable.
Yeah, no, it's great. Um, I know we're at like 20 minutes of personal updates, but the last update I have is last week I was working and my internet went out. I work from home, and so I was like, "Oh, this sucks. Like, I'll just go to Starbucks." So I went to Starbucks, and then the power went out at Starbucks, and I was like, "Maybe I shouldn't work today."
That's
Um,
hilarious.
yeah, but when I came back home, Comcast, so they'd clearly been working on my internet, like our neighborhood. There's like two utility boxes that sit, like one in my neighbor's yard to my left, one in my neighbor's yard to my right. And I guess that's how they like, I guess they run cable underground, like in these like X number amount of feet. And then these little boxes are just like how they run to,
Uh huh.
which makes sense. Like then you don't have like hundreds of feet of cable you're working with. But I guess something went wrong with our cable, and their stopgap was like, okay, well, we'll just run our Comcast cable from that box outside along essentially my front yard to the other box, so that I can literally walk outside and cut that cable and just take down the whole neighborhood.
Oh man, you should
It,
do that just before you leave for the weekend or something.
oh,
Just like
well,
mow over it with a push mower or something.
but then I won't be able to watch Netflix, which I recently got my account back for. So
That's funny. I'm excited because AT&T's been there's this big apartment loft building that's being finished, and I think AT&T's running fiber to that building or something. And I'm hoping that I can finally get like the corner of my block now has like a panel underground through the sidewalk. And AT&T is doing a ton of work over here, so I'm hoping that I can get gigabit fiber. I really hope so.
I I literally check because they have AT&T fiber in Memphis. I literally check probably once a month if it's available. Like literally right now, I'm typing in my address because you said AT&T fiber.
Yeah. When you go to like AT&T.com, I can put in my address and it's like, yeah, you can get 5 megabits or 100. And I'm like, I don't want dial up. Like, what are you talking about? Like, and when I called their support and they were like, yeah, the hundred's over fiber. Like, um,
What?
it's over a fiber cable. And I was like, well, then why can't I get 1,000?
Just turn
Like,
it on. Just flip the switch. What are you
so,
doing?
so I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that, because my neighbor got a text message that said that their super fiber was available at his house. He's two houses down, further away from the AT&T stuff than I am. But I don't have right now AT&T as my internet provider. So when I go to
Your
the
neighbor.
link that when I go to the link that he got on the text message, it redirects me to like a login page for existing customers, and
Uh,
it shows that, but it makes me wonder if I signed up for a month and paid for internet that I might not use, I might be able to sign up and then immediately upgrade to the gigabit. And I just was like, I don't know if I want to pay the $50 just to gamble and see if I could get that.
yeah, I feel like at that point, could you just call customer service and be like,
Oh, I have 6 times. The first person told me I could, but it was a year contract. And so I was like, cool, I'll just call back after I go double check and see if I'm in a contract with my current service. And then I called back 5 times, and every single person was like, yeah, we don't offer gigabit internet to your house. And I was like, but I just talked to someone that did. And I was like, God. So yeah, I don't know what's going on, but they're like, their customer support reps and salespeople like just have whatever's available in their software. So they can really only see what I can see online, which sucks. Because I was like, can't you just escalate me to someone who knows more about this? Just please, I just want to give you my money and you won't take it. So I'm hoping they update that online soon because that would save me hours of uploading time for Go Rails. Just uploading, a gig for a video to YouTube and to Wistia. It's just frustrating. It takes so long, and then you upload it and you're like, oh no, I didn't resize or like move my webcam around correctly. I have to do this all over again. It's the worst.
sounds so painful.
So you brought up something about Turbolinks Android before we were recording. What's the new thing? What's the news on that?
So I don't remember how I stumbled across it. I was just floating down the interwebs, and I read like on the Turbolinks Android wiki page that Turbolinks Android One X is deprecated. And for those who don't know, maybe you know about Turbolinks, but you don't know about like Turbolinks Android or iOS. They have these adapters Basecamp does that they've written. So like when you use the Basecamp app, you are using like a native iOS or Android shell, and then just essentially like web views that are powered by Turbolinks.
Yeah,
Um,
so like they embed the Basecamp website into the app, but then if I remember right, basically every Turbolinks click will go pass through the app for processing, and then it checks to see if it's approved or not. And if it is, it will go load it. And then things you can intercept there and say, like, well, you clicked on the settings link and we want to have a native settings page. We're going to show you that native view instead or whatever. So that's kind of how the Turbolinks mobile stuff works is it just like watches every request and then chooses, do we allow it in the browser or do we drop out to a native thing?
yeah, it's a really fascinating approach. Um, Chris, I think you've mentioned before, or maybe you mentioned earlier when we were talking, like it is wild though, because like it's not something that they really talk about a lot. Like these two libraries, like they talk about Turbolinks and Stimulus, but like,
Yeah, you never hear anything about the mobile stuff, and people don't really write tutorials or anything on it either. So it was one of those things that like it's sort of, but part of it is like if you want to do anything native with this, you do need to know all of the Android libraries and the iOS libraries and be able to code in Swift or Java or Kotlin or whatever. So that's like makes it tougher to use these than React Native because for the most part you gotta just use React on that. But I do think that you would get a lot more of a native feel if you're using more native code.
yeah, um, Basecamp's like, they're not a big company per se, like, and that
No,
kind of,
they're pretty small, like 50 people.
yeah, and they pride themselves on that, which is cool. But like part of those 50 people is, I believe, like an Android developer and like an iOS developer, if not
Yeah.
multiple.
If yeah, it's only like one or two people or whatever, and I'm sure everybody else kind of understands what's going on with it, but not
Sure.
actively or full time on it.
And so that's why like this approach, I'm guessing like that makes sense for them. Like you have a couple of people who know those APIs and like know those languages, and then they can just tie it into like the rest of the app that the other devs are working on. Like it's pretty cool. But anyway, so Android, I read this article that version 1 is the adapter is being deprecated for Android, and I was like, huh.
I mean,
So
it's being deprecated without any future solution yet, right? There's
right,
like an idea of how it might work, but
yeah. So essentially, like I know nothing about Android programming, but like I want to, but the only time I really done Android's like with React Native, which isn't really Android programming, and so I know enough to know that there are uh, there's a concept of activities in Android. And if I understand from reading this like deprecation article, since like Turbolinks loads these web pages, they use web views, which are like a set of APIs and components, like actually available in iOS and in Android. They're just implemented differently. And so, like on the web, like in Safari or Chrome or Firefox, when you open a Turbolinks app, and I'm air quoting here, it load like the idea is that hey, let's load all the CSS and JavaScript that we need, and then let's just keep that here in the browser because like the browser's already loaded it, and then we'll just swap out the body tag, right? Like that's kind of the premise of Turbolinks in high levels.
mm-hmm.
And so the way to do that on Android is they just load one web view component, and then when the activity changes, instead of throwing away the web view, they just detach it and attach it to this new activity.
Right. So it's like keeping your tab between windows or something, like it on
Right,
your desktop, right?
right. And so it's pretty fascinating, but something happened where that approach won't work anymore. And if I tried to explain the technical details, I'd be an idiot. But I think it happened in Chromium 64. And so they actually had a patch for it, but they said, hey, this is a pretty leaky patch. And like the vibe I got was, we don't want to just like build, build our Android app, or you build your Android app around kind of like hacks. And so they said, we're just going to deprecate this, and we have a general idea of how we're going to fix it. And like in the blog post, it talks about, and you told me this earlier, like Basecamp on their like Android side is using more Kotlin. And so they're like, we're working on like a 2.0 adapter, but for right now, we don't know when that'll be released. Hopefully 2019. We don't know what it'll look like, but it's possible. So here we are. And I was like, man, kudos to them for like staying on top of that and like wanting to not just like put the hack out there. But B, that's gotta suck. Like doing all that work to make this like Turbolinks abstraction, and then Chromium's like, nah, we're gonna change this public API, and it like shutters everything. I don't know. That's gotta
Yeah. Well, it feels like, any of those situations like we talk about when we're developing Rails apps where, the more gems you have, the less control in the future you have. So like, the library decides to take a different direction in version 2.0 or something that you don't need or want, and you're kind of stuck. And, that it's effectively the same thing. They've taken a direction in Chrome, or Chromium on mobile that they didn't want for, or doesn't work for Turbolinks. So they now have to find a new workaround for that. And that's kind of painful to deal with, especially in a situation like this that sounds like there isn't a reasonable replacement for it. Or it's not like, oh, just use this other thing. It's like, well, there may not be a solution that's reliable or good at all. Um, right now, at least. So that sounds kind of rough.
Yeah, I'll link through the show notes. It's fascinating to me though, and I'm they don't talk a lot about it. It's something I've tried to use a couple of times, but I
Yeah,
just
I've used it a bit and it's great. You just have to be. It's definitely, I would say, the best if you don't plan on having any native stuff. Like it's so easy to drop in. You just have to be aware, which is one of my frustrations with Turbolinks is that, and I've there's an open issue on Turbolinks that I created a while ago that was like, well, okay, you've introduced these mobile views or adapters, and Turbolinks handles all GET requests, but why doesn't Rails have a way of handling form errors by default? Because the Turbolinks Rails integration, that gem, we'll check and see if Turbolinks is enabled and make a if you make a request that knows Turbolinks was on, then it can use and replace the redirect to instead of doing a normal 302 redirect. It can actually send back a Turbolinks visit and clear cache response as JavaScript, which is awesome. But when a form fails, you need to actually re-render the form with the errors and all the content, and they don't have a way of handling that, which is like the required piece to actually use Turbolinks Android and iOS, because those by default don't allow any post requests because the post request by default is going to blow away all your CSS and JavaScript um, and then reload it, which is the one thing that you don't want to do on mobile. You don't want to re-download that, and so then it won't feel native. And so that was like turned off by default, but with no solution built into Turbolinks, which seems strange. So it's one of those things they still have some rough edges that they need to address, and it wouldn't be that hard. There's been in that thread like a bunch of other solutions that are pretty solid, but they just haven't included any of them yet. And it's like, just do something. Like, give us some solution, just even if it's not perfect, some starting place would be good so we could go and like contribute to making it better. But we just need some sort of decision on a starting point.
right. Yeah. So kind of shifting gears, I will punch your way. We talked about a little bit of like autoloading, threading
Yes,
earlier, and
yes.
I would love to hear about that some more, and I'm sure people listening would as well.
Yeah. So this is something that I haven't written a lot of threaded code in the past few years. I did more in school, like in university classes, like just exploring and learning about threaded stuff. But one of the things that Rails does is the reloader, and there's actually in the guides on Rails a new, I think it's even tagged as a work in progress article here called "Threading and Code Execution in Rails." Um, and this is really interesting because Rails does concurrent stuff now, especially with active job, Like it's got to run those jobs asynchronously and stuff. And so it's basically Rails is trying to handle the concurrency stuff for you so you don't have to deal with it, which is good. But one of the situations I was having recently was I was using Sidekick to deploy stuff with Hatchbox, of course, and deploying to a cluster where I have to go and install, or clone the Git repo on 5 different machines. I want to do that in parallel. So I had Sidekick Batch as the gem doing that, but there's some issues with it with recent versions of Sidekick where the open source thing doesn't work. And you can pay for the Sidekick Pro version, but I didn't really. The Basically the cost of that was just kind of high for this project right now. But the open source one didn't work at all. So I was like, you know what I'll do is I'll just write my own threaded version of this in a Sidekick job, and that should be good enough. And yeah, it sort of worked. And then my Sidekick jobs would just hang permanently in development. And I had no way to really figure out what was going on. I could like print different put statements in there. Nothing would really tell me what was going on. And it was basically just getting into a deadlock somewhere. And I figured out because a friend of mine told me to look into this article here and basically check out the reloader, because this is what in development will reload your classes. So every time you change something in development, you don't have to restart your Rails app. That is part of all of this stuff that's going on. So it's reloading your classes and modules and things. And I had written mine incorrectly. And some of the stuff in the guides will tell you, like, if you're going to use modules, actually explicitly write out the module and don't put class module colon colon whatever. Definitely put it as a module and then nest the class inside of it. And that helps the reloader to actually find the right things. And it turns out that was actually the issue that I had had because I was writing that in the wrong style. So I had to go back and rewrite a bunch of that code and just kind of nest it differently. And that fixed my problem. It was really interesting. But I would recommend reading that Rails guide if you're interested in how some of that stuff works. It's really cool.
I mentioned this earlier, but I've written. I've actually never written any kind of like threaded code. Now that I think about it, maybe I did. Maybe like when you mentioned in school, maybe I did there.
Yeah, I should make a screencast on this because I don't think a lot of people have, and Rails and Puma and everything will basically do all that for you. Like they make it so you don't have to worry about it for 99.9% of what you write, and that's good. But if you ever need to do stuff in parallel, you're gonna have to write some threaded code, and that would be a great screencast to make because it's really straightforward. Like you write an array and say like I want to create 5 threads that will do this work, and you do the work inside of a block inside of the thread, and then at the end of creating all those threads you say thread.join, and your main process will just sit there and wait until all of your threads have completed before it goes and continues. And so it's really straightforward how to do it. But you have to be careful not to modify, global variables or whatever, because things need to be thread safe. And we can include some links on more about learning about thread safety and stuff like that. But it's something I probably can't super well explain because I haven't done a whole lot of it recently. But you can end up doing things where your threads effectively are running at the same time, but they can be interrupted at random. And so if you are doing something where 2 of them are modifying a variable that's global, one could change it to a value, and then the other one changes it to a different value. And the first one sees the new value from the other thread that it wasn't expecting, and things can go wrong that way. So threading can be quite complex, but it also isn't that hard. So
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by it because like I've talked with well, like when I've worked like with Hanami, they're like, Hanami is thread safe by default. And I've talked with some other developers who like work on libraries and talk about thread safety. I'm like, oh, that sounds really nice, and that's about it. Like,
Yeah.
I want to learn more about it. I just I don't know much about it.
Yeah, I think it's a thing that you need it if you're doing that kind of work, but a lot of times we don't really need that kind of work. So it's something you don't need to deal with, or you pay for Sidekick and you let or use Sidekick open source and you let it deal with it, and you just write the work you need to get done and let Sidekick deal with that for you. So it's kind of nice in the community that you don't have to deal with any threading related things for the most part.
Yeah, no, it's nice. There's I'll say that for another time. There we're kind of running out of time. There are a couple more things I just want to talk about real quick.
Yeah.
First is I was on Reddit where I recently realized I spent a lot of time, but only on the Ruby subreddit. Um, there's a gem release called Suggest RB, and I'm kind of like paraphrasing what I read earlier this week. It was inspired by apparently some kind of library or something, some kind of similar concept in Smalltalk. And essentially, what it is you give this you call this method on an object, and for the sake of what I'm talking about, everything in Ruby is an object, so you call it on like an instance of an array or something like that. And let me look up the exact method name. I think you say what returns is the
Yeah,
name of the
what
method.
underscore returns question mark.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So like the first example is I have an array and it has three values, 1, 2, and 3. I can call a method on that array that says what returns, and my argument is 1. I want to know what I can call on this array that returns the value 1. And if I'm going off like what I remember the doc saying, I think it'll return an array of like symbols, and it's like you can call first or min on this
Right.
array and get that value.
Right. Yeah, because you have 1, 2, and 3 in there. So 1 being the first value that would give it to you, and then min being the one that finds the smallest number. Same thing. And so if you had them in different order, like 1 might be last, and it would give you last in min. It's pretty cool. It's like a interesting thing. It's weird because um, what if the arguments take, or what if the method takes arguments? Then how does all that work? It's got to be more complex than it seems.
Yeah. It's crazy because you can give it arguments. I think because we looked at
Mm-hmm.
you and I pulled up the source code, and like it has an arguments keyword argument in the method, and then
I wonder
also
if
it'll.
that is like optional arguments. Like if we pass this in, but what if we didn't necessarily pass it in? I imagine they're kind of like, find all methods that take either 1 or 0 arguments or whatever and try
Oh
that.
yeah,
Because I'm assuming it just calls all the methods on there that have the correct number of arguments and then sees if the results match, I guess. It's kind of cool.
yeah. And the other thing it'll give you is I can't remember the exact name. You may have the docs pulled up. It's like a way to avoid like getting methods back that'll mutate the object.
Yeah, it looks like allow mutation, true
Yeah.
or
Okay.
false.
So the inverse of that. Sorry.
But
I
yeah.
just think that's so fascinating. Like,
So
never.
it'll even check and see if the original array or object you had was changed, which is neat. That's super cool.
It's so cool. I never in like 1,000 years would have thought, this would be a good idea. Like, I never would have thought of the idea. And now, like, I can think of so many times I'm programming and like just for lack of a better like phrase, just like throwing things against the wall, seeing if they stick. Like,
Yeah.
will this
Well,
method do this? Like, does this
this
method
kind
even
of
exist?
right. This kind of gets back to, I guess, the like there's a philosophy that Alan Kay had in programming that was very like human focused, of kind of like design your programming language so that um like this effectively. Like you can go and ask your programming language how to get the result you want. And that's not something that normal languages these days even think about. And it's just a way of like having the code and the programming language communicate with the developer in an interesting way. And we don't see that much anymore. It's so like, deliberate for most programming where you have to already know, you have to go look up the docs, you have to know what you're trying to accomplish, and then you have to go find out what's the method name or how do I do that myself instead of, being able to guess or ask the programming language how to do it. It's interesting. It's very cool.
Yeah, it's super cool. So I'm excited to use it, and even if it saves me like 3 minutes a day, like I'll take it. Especially
Yeah.
because it's free. It's a gym.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure there's lots of improvements that can be made or whatever to add cool new features and stuff. So yeah, it seems awesome. I like it.
So that was cool. And then the last thing I want to mention is a project I literally just told you about. So I've shared this with you. I'll share it here. Like I started the year by writing I ended last year and started this year by writing 2 blog posts. The first of which was like goodbye 2018 is I think what I called it. Because a lot of people write like their year in reviews.
Mm-hmm.
And like I wasn't planning on writing one, but I was like, what would mine look like? Like thinking about it, and I was like, man, like there are some good things, but like I didn't really do a lot of like things I guess I like wanted to do. Which is a lot of like I don't know, I like want to build stuff and I want people to use it. And I think a lot of like the last 2 years I spent a lot of that time wanting to do that and make money off of it, which I don't think is a bad goal. Like
Oh,
by
of
any
course
means.
not. Yeah.
Because what I'm about to say kind of, I don't want that to be the implication. But like, I think for me, like things shifted, like money just became the goal over like just actually wanting to help people and like build cool stuff and like scratch my own itch. And I think it really kind of muddied up the water for me. And so like my plan for this year is just to like build stuff and like do things to like help people because like I have a good day job, and like my financial needs are met. So like, what if I just did stuff because I wanted to do it? And
Mm-hmm.
so
I
like, what
mean,
am I? Go
I
ahead.
was gonna say that's that's effectively where GoRail started. Like I was just like, well, I'll buy a domain and I will document my own Rails like processes and just publish that online because I want to keep notes for myself, but I might as well help other people and share it. And then it turned into, that stuff always works out that way because, if you're actually helping people, then they're willing to give you money because you're really helping them. And that's a much more natural way of making stuff that works.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it sounds more fun. Like now that like I have like drawn this line in the sand, like one day if I can like build something that like pays my bills, like that's totally cool, or like makes some side change. But like now that for right now I'm like drawing this line in the sand, I'm like I don't want to even think about the money part. Like I just want to like build stuff. Like I feel so much more like relaxed and like
Mm-hmm.
excited to do stuff. So all that to say, like one thing you and I've talked about is, um, like you do Go Rails and you do shout out these really great videos on like for like people who are already writing Ruby and Rails for the most part. And there's a lot of like beginner content out there, but like a lot of it's kind of starting to stale a little bit. Not all of it, but some of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for this year, like I want to like try and like help beginners like get into Ruby, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
whether it's like making videos or like writing blog posts or whatever. But one of the first things I thought about was like if I'm new to Ruby or maybe new to programming, what's like a hurdle that gets in the way? And for me, that was like installing Ruby is easy for me now, but if you're not like super well versed in programming, it could probably be like you've never opened the terminal before, right? Uh, so I was like, I want to build like essentially what was like try Ruby, but is where you just like it's not necessarily guided. You can just type code in and run it.
Like you wouldn't even have to install Ruby.
Right. You just go to the browser and
Yeah.
like
Yeah. I think
type
that's
in.
why Codecademy was so successful. Like you can go learn JavaScript and Ruby and whatever else without ever having to, and Code School too. Like they had the online interpreters. I think you're absolutely right about that.
And, Code School is now a Pluralsight. And if you go to tryruby.org, it just takes you to Pluralsight.
So
And
those have kind of fallen away. We
yeah.
need a replacement.
And so, like, essentially, what I want to do is, like, I think this year, like, I think about doing is writing, like, a set of tutorials or, like, some kind of ebook just for, like, the fundamentals of, like, Ruby, like, just the beginning stuff. Aimed at people who don't use Ruby who maybe want to experiment with it. And so this was the first step of that is give these people a place to go and try out this Ruby without having to install it. And so there is, I have a friend, he used to be one of my coworkers, who is, I consider to be like the most intelligent person I've ever met. And I don't say that lightly. And so I was like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Like, how would you approach this? I called him on a Friday seeking his input, and by Friday night he had pretty much coded up half of it for me. And it's really cool for those interested. What essentially, instead of like building like a sandbox version of Ruby that like an API hits with like Ruby code and then it returns a result, this actually just runs in your browser using WebAssembly. So he has taken Ruby 2.6.0, used Emscripten and some other libraries, I think, and basically taken Ruby 2.6.0 and just put it into a WebAssembly module that then when you type in these commands or you can write classes out, you can any kind of Ruby code, and then you click run, it just, without leaving your browser, just goes to this WebAssembly module, compiles that Ruby and returns the result right there in the browser.
That's super cool.
It's pretty freaking cool. So essentially all I ended up doing was making the aesthetic of it, and we just made it like it's just a Create React app, and
that's great.
It's awesome. So anyway, I want to talk about that because I'm gonna release it before we release this episode, and it's going to be at runrb.io, runrb.io.
Nice, I like it.
I want to call it RunRB.
Ooh, okay, I like it.
So like, because if you just look at RunRB and you don't know that RB is a Ruby extension, it's like, what? You call it RunRB. It's a fun little name.
Yeah, so, you can have a logo as a bee with some, like running clothes on and shoes.
Right now, the logo is a Ruby with legs.
Perfect.
It's so dumb, but I love it so much.
That's great.
Anyway,
I'm excited.
Yeah.
Is it up now?
No, I thought it was. I worked on it a couple weeks ago, and then I just went to the domain before we started. And it's not there. So,
but it will be there when
it will be before we release this to the world. I'm going to deploy it, and I don't expect it to be perfect. Like right now, I think it's only the standard. It may not even include like even the standard library. Like you can't like require CSV right now, but like those are things I'm going to add. But yeah, it's a good start, and
that's cool, man.
You can go to it from your phone. Like if you're like, I wonder, you're thinking about Ruby and want to see if something works. Like, I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
It reminds me of I use that rubular.com all the time for regex testing and everything. Like having a similar site with just some Ruby code in there would be great, because I pretty regularly open up a IRB console and I'm like, can I do this? And try something out. And, being able to do that in the browser would be really easy.
I have to talk to Will, because I run everything by Will because he's a genius. What if Runner B auto loaded that suggestion or that can I use what's it called suggest RB gem,
Mm-hmm.
and then you could just open up the website, give it an object or an instance, and be like, "Can I run this?" That'd be cool.
Yeah. And isn't there, or is it built in? I forget the name of the library, the one that's like uh,
Did
fixes
you mean?
typos for you. Yeah. Did you
Yeah,
mean? Yeah. That'd be sweet to have too.
yeah,
You should definitely allow. I mean, I'm already making feature requests and it's not live yet, but you should make it so that we can save those snippets or something, so that we can like write something out and then come back and reference it later or whatever.
yeah. That's definitely on my idea list. It's not something I have like right now.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Well,
I'm sure people use it and be like, "This is broken.
are you
Here
gonna keep
sucks."
it private or open source, or what's the plan?
Right now, it's private. I mean, I'm not opposed to open sourcing it, but because I don't understand all of the technical details, I don't know. I just talked to Will about it. Will Glenn, shout out, smartest person I know.
Awesome. I'm
Cool,
excited
man.
to see this.
Well, we did it. We talked for 56 minutes on our second.
Yeah. Well, it's been 2 weeks since we've had a chat, so
It's good, man. Good catching up, and I got to run. I'll talk to you soon.
all right. Catch you later.